Conservative Voices Silenced. I'm Christine Sposato, and I'm excited to be your guide through the stories that matter. Stories of resilience, strength, and triumph in a world that doesn't always make space for conservative voices.
And I'm Elizabeth Smith, joining Christine in this journey. We know how it feels when your beliefs seem to be drowned out by the noise, but here on this podcast, we're turning up the volume.
That's right, Elizabeth, and we're creating a space where conservative voices can speak their truths, sharing the challenges they've faced and the victories they've celebrated.
Conservative Voices Silenced is not just a podcast, it's a movement that recognizes the diversity within conservatism and gives a platform to those who felt marginalized.
So whether you're a conservative looking for reliable stories or someone curious about the experiences of those with differing viewpoints, you're in the right place.
Get ready for an engaging ride as we dive into the trials and triumphs of conservatives navigating a progressive world. We invite you to join us on this journey of discovery, understanding, and most importantly, amplifying voices that deserve to be heard.
This is Conservative Voices Silenced, where silence ends and the conversation begins.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Conservative Voices Silence today with Elizabeth Smith and Christine Sposato. Today we have Sam Faddis. I am so excited to bring him here. He's our Army officer and retired CIA operations officer and president of the Pennsylvania Patriot Coalition. Thank you so much for being here today, Sam.
I am honored to be here, ladies. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Would you like to discuss the Pennsylvania Patriot Coalition? Speaking on it, but...
Well, so the coalition is sort of an overarching confederation, if you will, of patriot groups, America First groups, MAGA groups, whatever terminology you want to use in Pennsylvania. So they all fight under their own flags, as one would expect from independent-minded people, but we try our best to sort of keep all the cats moving generally in the right direction and working together and communicating. So they're not all sitting around in their own stovepipes, being picked off one by one. Some days we succeed. Some days we succeed less. But in general, we've been doing this for a few years now, and it has made a huge difference in terms of the effectiveness of patriot groups in Pennsylvania.
Is there anything specific they're doing? Like, is it for voting, election integrity, or just kind of everything that's going on?
So when we first, we're talking roughly 100 groups, depending on how you count.
Okay.
You know, some of these groups are 100,000 people. Some of these groups are 8 guys in a barn. So we formed originally around the issue of election integrity following the 2020 election. Part of that was because that was, I think, the most salient, most immediate issue. Mm-hmm. Also, part of it was because, as you can imagine, getting all these people to agree to work together was not the easiest thing in the world, and choosing an issue on which they could all agree helped in that unifying process. At this point, we have expanded into a whole range of America First issues, I guess would be the simplest way to put it. And right now, at this point in time, we are just full on all day, every day, working with the Trump campaign in Pennsylvania. That's what we're doing all day, every day in Pennsylvania right now.
Yeah, I just joined recently, so I'm excited.
Can you hear me? I've been having some connectivity issues.
Yeah, I can hear you right now. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. You mentioned election integrity and being in Western Colorado. Tina Peters' court case was just concluded yesterday, and she was found guilty on 7 of 10 felony counts. Are you familiar with the Tina Peters case out here?
Only very generally, not the details now.
Okay. And I only know very generally as well. She was the county clerk who was in charge of the elections in 2020. She knew that the computers were off, being hacked, something. I don't know all the details, but
Right.
a lot of patriot groups were very hopeful that she would be found not guilty because she went around the law to gather data to be able to prove that somebody had been in to change the outcome of the election. And unfortunately, she was found guilty. We're hoping to get someone on the show who is an expert in this. I have friends in this area who have gone to the courthouse and been there every day of the trial. So, with the election coming up in just a few weeks, how do you feel? What's the status right now in terms of election integrity? Do you feel confident that we've resolved the issues, or are they still working around real, true, honest elections?
So, I mean, I am. Let me uh, let me think exactly how I want to nuance this. Look, are we in a better position than we were in 2020? Yeah, by a long shot. Why? Because people are awake to the danger and awake to the fraud and have their eyes opened. And so you're talking in many cases about somebody having to basically run the same scam that they ran on you once before and now get away with it. And that's a lot harder. So I have some significant confidence that we're in a significantly better place because of that, because people are aware, paying attention. You used the word resolved. Have we resolved the issues? Absolutely not. We have not resolved the issues. And as with so many things, the other side, the folks who want to say there is no problem, they just resort to making statements without factual basis, which I think we call lies. And then they just chant them over and over and over, and you are expected to just accept this false reality. So, we're just told that there are no vulnerabilities to, let's just pick a thing, voting machines, right? Which are basically in most places kind of tablet type devices. And okay, there are no vulnerabilities, it's all perfect, and they're not connected to the internet, all these other conclusory type statements. Okay, well, that's crap. Sorry, that's garbage. Okay, I go into vote. I mean, all of this varies state by state and even precinct or county by county, certainly a lot. But when I go down to vote, I vote on a basically what is a glorified tablet. And I touch on the screen next to Donald Trump or whoever I'm voting for, and it registers electronically the vote. And then at the end, it kicks out a hard copy sort of cardstock thing, or actually, I'm sorry, prints out more like a receipt on these machines. And then I take that and I look at it, and it shows my votes in English letters, Trump or whoever and all the other offices. And then having confirmed, in quotes, that my vote was registered correctly, I throw that in a box, and it's later taken fed through a scanner and electronically tabulated. So I'm supposed to accept that all of that there's integrity in all of that. Well, there's not. I mean, so that voting machine may or may not be connected to the internet at the time that I register my vote. But anybody who has an iPhone or a tablet and understands they have to update their software understands that at some point that device has to be connected either to the internet via Wi-Fi or Bluetooth or something, or somebody's got to stick a thumb drive or the equivalent in it, because you got to update the software. Also, by the way, the candidates' names change every election, so you have to update it. Every single time you do that, connected to a thumb drive, connected to the Wi-Fi, is an opportunity for malware, some sort of malicious code to be introduced into the device, which we see all around us all of the time. So don't tell me that device is like Fort Knox and it can't be screwed with. So let's look at the receipt. And it says, I voted for Donald Trump. But on the other side is a QR code. And the machine that actually reads the receipt and tabulates the vote doesn't read the words Donald Trump. The machine reads only the QR code. So I don't know about you guys, but I don't speak QR and I don't read QR.
Right.
So the fact that it says Donald Trump on one side of the receipt does not mean that's what the QR code says. So in fact, you're letting me see that there are English words printed on one side, but it's a meaningless feel-good exercise because the only thing that counts is what that machine language QR code says. We could go on in this vein forever, right? When that QR code is fed into the big scanner and then a computer tabulates it, it has all the same vulnerabilities as the tablet voting machine. It has to be updated. It most certainly has to be connected to the internet at various points. I mean, come on, your banks are hacked all the time. The federal government is hacked all the time. We hack the Iranians. The Iranians hack us. But somehow out of all of this stuff, those voting machines, those tablets that are maintained by somebody at the county level, well, actually not even maintained at the county level because typically it's a vendor who maintains the machine. So because it's all proprietary code, which you're supposed to think proprietary is now supposed to be a synonym for gee whiz, super cool, and can't be messed with. But that's not the word, what proprietary means. What it means is only the company knows how it works. So even that person, I live in Susquehanna County in PA. Well, the Susquehanna County people, no matter how well-intentioned they are, actually can't confirm to you that that thing is working the way it's supposed to. They don't know if it's been programmed that it will switch every fifth vote from Biden to Trump. In fact, not only don't they, it's not a question of technological capability or technical capability, which may be true as well. They're actually forbidden to do that because only the company can access that stuff. And in Pennsylvania, they have prosecuted people for having the audacity at the county level to want to crack open the machine basically and figure out how it works. So anyway, I mean, I don't want to get lost in detail. The point is, when you really get down to the brass tacks and start walking through the system, this is not conspiracy theory. This is why the Pennsylvania Patriot Coalition's mantra from day one has been paper ballots on election day with ID, and you do a hand count of the ballots. Machines, computers, software, nowhere in the mix. And we don't have to wonder where the paper ballots are really, that they're coming in the mail or coming from. Just boil it down and make it really simple. As we used to say in the military, right? Keep it simple, stupid. Just make this a simple system. Boil out the vulnerabilities. Have we cracked the code on that in PA? No. And virtually nowhere in the United States has anybody cracked the code on.
Yep. Erie County, and it's feels like a long road, but I've been to meetings where people who really don't know what's going on, but they want to get involved. And you explain some of the things that are happening, like the voting machines, being connected to the internet, and it just, the looks on their faces, like, that's not possible. How's that possible? It is. Sorry, but it is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the answer is obviously that people, the America First people, need to take control of the system. That's the real answer. I mean, like in Pennsylvania, we have mail-in voting because a Republican-controlled legislature. At that point in time, the Republican Party controlled both houses. So the Republican Party gave us mail-in voting. They didn't. The Democrats didn't do it in the dark of night. The Republicans decided this was a great idea. So that'll tell you how divorced from reality they are.
Yeah.
Was that before COVID or during COVID?
So it was actually sort of as COVID began. It depends on exact what date. But this makes it even worse. The reason the Republican Party in Pennsylvania did this is because going into the 2020 election, the establishment, in their infinite wisdom, had decided that Donald Trump was a drag on their down ballot candidates. They decided he was unpopular and was going to lose. And at the time in Pennsylvania, we still had straight ticket voting. You could vote all Dems and all Republicans. So these guys in their august wisdom decided, well, so the people are going to vote against Trump and they're just going to select all Dems. So they made a backroom deal with the Democratic Party, and they gave the Democratic Party their ultimate fantasy, which was mail-in voting. And in exchange, the Dems agreed to get rid of straight ticket voting. So the ultimate smoke-filled backroom deal that from the Republican standpoint was actually cutting away Donald Trump, stabbing Donald Trump in the back and saying, you're a lost cause. Now, if you look at the vote totals subsequently, you know, he garnered, no matter how you count, significantly more votes the second time he ran than the first time he ran. So the Republican Party establishment had not one frigging clue what they were talking about. I mean, but that's what they did. And so they did it very deliberately. And it's one of the reasons they don't really want to talk about it now, because here's the guy who now basically controls the Republican Party, right? And is their candidate for president, and nobody really wants to acknowledge that a few years ago they were trying to cut him loose.
Right. Politics is just such a squirmy thing, man. It's just whatever you see, you have to assume that there is, you know, like an iceberg. What you see is just the tip, and what's really going on is all under the surface. Like you said, the smoke-filled back room is where everything really happens. And I don't think a lot of people really realize that.
No, look, I spent a big chunk of my life involved in the business of espionage. Politics is probably uglier than espionage, at least along the way. In the world of spying, I did find a few people that I could probably trust. I'm not sure that's true in politics. Okay, that's a little facetious and a little exaggeration, but you take the point. I mean, it's
right.
It is
right. Okay, so you were a senior CIA operations officer. Tell us a little bit about that. That's something that we know very little about. And then give us your point of view on what's happening on the global scale right now. You know, things are escalating in Israel and the Middle East, and just share with us what you see from your perspective.
right. I was what CIA calls an operations officer. Also, sometimes it is also referred to as a case officer. What normal Americans would call a spy. In other words, in CIA speak, a spy is the foreigner who gives us information. You know, the guy that I recruit inside Russian intelligence who hands us secrets, he's the guy we call a spy. The guy who handles him for CIA, recruits him, is called an ops officer, case officer, or whatever terminology. Okay, that's trade language, but just so we're clear. So what was my job? My job was to work overseas. I spent almost all my time overseas. Honestly, when I came back to Washington, D.C., since nothing in Washington, D.C. makes sense, the first thing I did was try to get on a plane and go back downrange, because I was fine as long as I was in the Middle East chasing bad guys, but sitting in a conference room watching a PowerPoint presentation back in D.C. will give you brain damage. So basically, I got to get the hell out of Dodge as fast as possible because this place is messed up. I ran operations, which means your bread and butter is you recruit sources and then you run those sources securely and you produce intelligence. In other words, I recruit a guy inside Al-Qaeda, figure out how to do that, figure out how to get access to him, figure out how to convince him to work with us. And then I got to meet this guy securely and safely without getting him killed and me killed. And then we got to produce the intelligence. In other words, the intelligence reports that go to Washington. That's the real central purpose for which CIA exists is to produce that. So I worked, I worked Russians, I worked Chinese, I worked a whole host of targets. I spent most of my time in the Middle East or South Asia, so sort of Southern Europe, east to India. Honestly, I probably spent most of my time working against Iranians, Iraqis, terrorist groups, weapons of mass destruction, smuggling networks, those kind of people. Also was involved in what we would call covert action. So, in other words, I spent a year in Iraq before the invasion. Me and my team gathering intelligence and obviously doing everything possible to undermine Saddam Hussein's regime, buying off his generals, all of that stuff to make it as easy as possible for us to overthrow the government. And for that matter, if you're involved not just in acquiring intelligence on Al-Qaeda, but for instance, actually tracking down members of Al-Qaeda and one way or the other making them go away, that would be called covert action. I should add, just to be clear, all of this is done pursuant to authority from the government. And when it comes to anything that involves covert action, which would include lethal operations, but not always, that's all done pursuant to very specific authorizations from National Command Authority, which boils down to this. The President of the United States needs to sign what they call a finding, which is a letter, a document, if you will. And he needs to say, I have explicitly authorized the conduct of this operation. So it's not treated lightly. You don't get up in the morning and say, hey, I got a great idea, let's go kill this dude. That's not how that works. When Soleimani, who was the head of the Quds Force, IRGC, was killed, and I was long retired by that point. That was pursuant to a specific finding signed by Donald Trump that said, I authorize you guys, you in the military, to go forth, locate this guy, identify his location, and make him go away. For good reason, because he'd been killing a whole bunch of Americans for a very long time. What do I think about the world situation? It's a catastrophe. Look, it's a nightmare. It'd be really hard to start figuring out, to where to start on the list, the parade of horrors. This administration is, people talk about this administration being weak-kneed and naive and so forth. I think that's too charitable, to be blunt. I think it presumes that they're attempting to do the right thing and failing. And I think that fails to grasp the magnitude of what is really happening. So, we're standing on the cusp of a full-on regional war in the Middle East. Yeah. And the Iranians may already have nuclear weapons. If not, they may be about to get them any second. And the bottom line is we don't know, because our intelligence is terrible. Full-blown conventional and teetering on the edge of potentially even a nuclear exchange right in the Middle East. I'm just using this as an example. Well, this administration they have refused to enforce the sanctions against the Iranians that prevent them from selling their oil on the world stage. So by virtue of that, they have now handed to the Iranians in excess of $80 billion, and it may well be double that amount of money the Iranians have made. So anytime you see the Iranians arming the Houthis to shut down shipping in the Red Sea, missile barrages on Israel, Hezbollah's got an army bigger than most European countries. We go on down this list. Hamas, all of that, all those weapons and the training and everything and the money, all is really coming from oil money that the Iranians have, and the Iranians have as a result of a deliberate decision on the part of the Biden administration to allow them to make that money. Now, I'm just using I'm using this as a practical example. This is not the full scope by any means of what's going on. It's just, okay, guys, let's just look at that piece of it. That was a conscious policy decision to enrich the Ayatollahs in Tehran, knowing full well what they would do with that money, that they would set the Middle East on fire. And they have set the Middle East on fire, and yet we're still letting them get the money. We haven't. The Biden administration's special envoy to Iran is a guy named Bob Malley, or was. So Bob Malley has a long history of cool things like being a supporter of Hamas. I mean, this is a guy who goes back to the Obama years and thinks Hamas, thinks terrorists are cool guys. I mean, he says nothing but positive things. So this guy gets appointed to be our special envoy to carry on secret talks with the Iranians by the Biden administration. And nobody actually fully understands what the heck he was doing in these talks, because the Biden White House just does this. In other words, they don't tell Congress, they don't answer any questions. We don't even know really where he was, what he was doing. The only reason he's not the special envoy anymore is because he got busted, it appears, passing classified information to the Iranians. And they're still not answering any full questions about that. He was apparently turning over secret intelligence from our intelligence community to the Iranians. And as a consequence, when that blew up, they had to pull his security clearance. Now, all of that remains typical Washington in this cloud of smoke now. Nobody will answer any clear questions. What exactly did he do? What did he give him? Why is he still in the payroll? Why isn't he in prison? Because that's kind of a crime for which we send people away for the rest of their lives.
Right.
How come this guy is still drawing a paycheck? You know, just friggin' common sense questions like this. Nobody, of course, will answer any of this. And I'm not talking about like I called him up yesterday and said, hey, I want some answers. I mean, U.S. senators are banging on the table saying, what? What are you talking about here? Guys passing intel to the Iranians? By the way, you've never told us what he's actually doing with the Iranians. And, you know, they just get blown off, essentially. So anyway, I'm just digging into that a little bit to say, if we went on across the board, across the world, you would see the same pattern of activity. Venezuela, Maduro, right, who's busy cracking heads and slaughtering people in Venezuela who have the audacity to want democracy. Well, Biden did the same friggin' thing there. He stopped enforcing sanctions and let this bloodthirsty communist dictator enrich himself, right? And I mean, this is true everywhere. What these guys have done is successfully light, these guys, meaning our own people, light fires all over the world, and every one of them is detrimental to the United States.
Sam, I'm a conspiracy theorist. And so I always want to, like I said, look behind the curtain. And I have my own theory on why the Biden administration has let this happen. And my conclusion is typically follow the money. And somehow they are benefiting these wars and these conflicts and the military industrial complex. There's a reward in it for them. That's my theory. So what's your theory, or what do you think is going on? Why in the world have they let all this happen and done all this intentionally?
Well, I guess I don't deny the existence of conspiracies because, you know, I've seen a number of them in action, right? I mean, Saddam Hussein would have said there's a conspiracy to topple me from power in 2002. He would have been right. There was a conspiracy and it worked. Okay, so, but I also think that in many cases, what you have is sort of a confluence of interests. In other words, you have people that come together, not necessarily, in other words, they end up working in concert, not necessarily all for exactly the same reason, and not necessarily all getting together in a room and talking about it. So what am I talking about? To sort of come at this in reverse order of the things you said. Raytheon will build you a drone base on the dark side of the moon if you give them a big enough contract, right? And look, I'm all for a strong military-industrial complex. I just don't think the military-industrial complex should run our policy. I think they should do what they're told and support our policy. All about building planes and jets and so forth when we need them, but we shouldn't start wars so we can build planes and jets and sell planes and jets, if that makes sense. So, you know, you got a war going in Afghanistan. Well, the contractors who were making money hand over fist in Afghanistan for 20 years are not going to tell you your policy. There is no end game here. You're trying to turn Afghanistan into Switzerland and Central Asia. I got news for you. It won't work. The Pashtuns live in the 12th century and they're happy there. So whatever your solution is, this isn't it. Well, the guy that's making $1 billion a year off of running that war isn't going to be the guy that tells you this is a waste of time. Or currently, Ukraine and Russia. You want to keep producing bombs and artillery shells and shipping them to the Ukrainians, and we're going to keep making money. I'm not going to tell you that you're risking starting World War III and that you ought to be getting these people to the negotiating table as long as I'm making stacks and stacks and stacks of money off of it. And by the way, let's keep in mind that the guys who are running all these corporations, they're not going downrange and getting killed in Afghanistan or Iraq. They're not coming home without legs. And it's not their kids who are doing it either, right? Where I live in Northeast Pennsylvania, you pull in the Home Depot parking lot, you got the handicap spots closest to the store. You also got a big row of Purple Heart recipients, right? Because that's where all the cannon fodder came from for all of these wars. You don't find that in Bethesda or Silver Spring where the $3 million houses are and the guys that run Raytheon live. So that's just sort of that is a piece of it. But look, there are other, if you will, even more malevolent things going on here. Joe Biden's in the White House now. At this point, he's, as far as I can tell, a potted plant. But Joe, via Hunter and the whole lash up, took money from pretty much every thug on the planet. And I say this, by the way, as a guy who still has a copy of Hunter's hard drive. So I'm not I've seen what's on the hard drive. Horrifying as much of it is, and as much of it I wish I could carve out of my memory, because I don't really need to see Hunter walking around without his trousers on anymore. But I mean, the guy doesn't wear pants as far as I can tell. But forget about everybody else. These guys, Joe and his clan, took at least $31 million from the Chinese Communist Party and from guys directly connected to Chinese intelligence. So we started off talking about, I used to be an ops officer. I used to be a spy. That job has a variety of components, but my number one job was to recruit people in other outfits, to turn Chinese to work against their government, Russians to work against their government, Al-Qaeda guys. So I kind of know that trade because I did it for a long time and actually was pretty good at it. When foreign intelligence officers are handing you tens of millions of dollars, we call that espionage, right? And here's the deal. Espionage is a really, really cold, hard business, man. I mean, you can be nice and kind and soft and cuddly when you go home with mama and the kids. When you're out on the street involved in the spy game, you better be hard-nosed. Now, hopefully you don't lose your morality along the way. But the point is, spies don't give people money as a favor. And they don't give you money and then say, well, I hope you'll think kindly of my country, or I hope you'll generally think of us. And that maybe diplomats do that. When a spy hands you money, there's because it's a really cold, hard understanding of something really concrete you're doing for him. There's a price. In fact, the word control is used all the time in espionage. You tell somebody you recruited a source in Al-Qaeda, you're telling headquarters, I control him now. Now, exactly how you do that varies, right? If I recruit an Iraqi general to help me overthrow Saddam Hussein, I don't sit down in the room with him and scream orders in his face. He's a general. He's used to being treated with a certain amount of respect. Do I speak to him that way? I do. Does he know, nevertheless, what the bargain is that he made? Yes. I'm handing you $5,000 every time I see you. So when I tell you I would like you to do the following by the time our next meeting happens, that's not really me saying it would be nice if you did that. That's me saying, these are your instructions. And no matter how we coat that or package that for the target, that's what the hell that means. That's what it is. If I'm talking to the guy inside Al-Qaeda and I say, hey, I need you to get me the name and the number of so-and-so by the next time we meet next Tuesday, I'm not asking. I'm telling him it, right? That's the way the game works. I'm not trying to make this sound cool because sometimes it's ugly. The point is, when you're the vice president of the United States and you take $31 million from Chinese intelligence, you have to give them something really concrete in return. The Chinese are not clowns. They're not slouches. They didn't keep handing Hunter millions of dollars, hoping Hunter one day would come through, right? They might hand him money one time and say, let's take a shot. The payoff might be big, kind of like seed money, right? Let's see if he comes through. Years later, they weren't still handing the dude millions of dollars because they were hoping he might do something. Concrete things were coming back. Back to you talk about conspiracies. That ought to terrify every American, because the guy that they funneled $31 million to ultimately sat down in the Oval Office of the United States. And as I say to people all the time, I'd like you to make a list of every decision Joe made since the time he sat down that has national security or foreign policy implications, and just make one of the, like those decision tree things, yes, no. Okay, benefits the United States, benefits communist China. Yeah. I would defy you to find a single decision Joe has ever made in the Oval Office, I try not to say he's president, that benefited us to the detriment of communist China, if there is one. I don't know what it was. What's the very first thing this dude did? Shut off drilling, start crippling the fossil fuel industry. Then he drained our fossil fuel reserves. He has taken all these munitions that are going to the Ukrainians. Yeah. He has emptied our pre-positioned munition warehouses around the globe. The money, the stuff we stockpiled for decades in South Korea for a war with the North Koreans, long since been shipped to the Ukrainians. In the Middle East, the same thing. We have pre-positioned warehouses in case we have to send troops there. The ammo and so forth is sitting there. It ain't sitting there anymore. It went to Ukraine. I mean, we could just go on down the list
oil reserves.
Of what he's done. Oil reserves. He has, we started talking about the Iranians. He's made them rich and prosperous, right? He's made the Venezuelans rich and prosperous. He's made us weaker.
Yeah.
So if you want a conspiracy, there's a conspiracy for you. Why? Got a guy sitting in the White House who's the Manchurian candidate who took over $30 million from Chinese intelligence. By the way, before I stop talking for a minute, I'm sorry. Spies are cheap. In the movies, they always have giant briefcases filled with money, and everybody gets millions and millions and millions of dollars. I'm not saying you don't sometimes for big pay what you got to pay. The amount, and I'm not going to go into exact dollar amounts because now we'll get too close to sources and method. Most of the guys I ran as sources, even inside Al-Qaeda, got paid ridiculously small amounts of money. The amounts of money they got paid, you'd be like, no, that's not what Hollywood says. Hollywood says every one of these guys gets a briefcase filled with millions. You're like, this guy's getting a few $100 and he's risking his butt all day, every day. That's what's the reality. So imagine what you have to do to be worth $31 million to a Chinese intelligence service.
That's great perspective. Yeah. And that was another question I was going to ask you, actually, is in your experience, how hard is it to infiltrate some of these groups like Hamas and Al Qaeda? And, what I guess tied to a specific religion, and is their loyalty stronger or their commitment more difficult to penetrate because of that? Or are they just normal humans and they want to make their life easier and better? And so if they can get something in exchange for something they have, they'll take it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a mix of all of the above. I mean, again, not to get lost in the weeds of what we would call tradecraft. I mean, first of all, let's start with this. Not everybody is recruitable. Mm-hmm. So it's not like you can make everybody into a spy. Forget it. What it really comes down to is figuring out what will work with each individual person, and that's going to be different. I mean, in other words, if it's a target and if you judge they are recruitable, then what are their motivations? So, for instance, at the height of the Cold War, you're a Polish colonel in the Polish military. You're effectively under Russian occupation, under occupation by the Soviets. The Russians are the historic enemies of the Poles. That colonel, assuming you could get access to him as a CIA officer, which is a trick, might very well work with American intelligence and not even expect to be paid for it. Why? Because he's actually a real patriot and because he wants the Soviets out of the country. I'm talking, say it's 1980. My country's under foreign domination. Communism is an abomination. And working with the Americans doesn't require any ethical compromise. I'm working with people that want to help my people get free from communism. Now, you might pay him or you might not. That depends on personal circumstances. But you could see how that guy, for purely ideological reasons, for really good reasons, would say, I'm not selling out my country. My country is under foreign occupation. I'm protecting my country. I'm trying to free my nation. You might have a Russian intelligence officer who, you have a cash box that you go into for expenses. That Russian intelligence officer might have started taking money out of his funds to pay for a mistress he keeps on the side. And all of a sudden, Moscow has somebody who's come into country, wherever he is, and they're going to do an audit, and he's $50,000 short in his cash box. Mm-hmm. He might show up seeking out American intelligence, and he's just a ruthless, amoral jerk who's cheating on his wife and now is going to be going home and spending the rest of his life in prison after they beat the living hell out of him because he's been stealing money from the Russian government and they're not really very forgiving. And he might show up and look, whatever you say to him and however you feel about it, it's like, look, you're a mercenary jerk and I despise you too. But if you're going to give us intelligence and we're going to get you out of your current situation, then I guess we can make a bargain. With Al-Qaeda guys or Islamic extremists, this has been my experience, that you are talking about folks who are very, very committed to the cause. They absolutely believe that after they detonate a suicide vest, they're awakening in paradise. They believe that Armageddon is coming. They want Armageddon, their version, and they're going to win. They believe all of that. And as a consequence, they may very well do absolutely horrible things. Even if, obviously, if I'm talking to them, they didn't detonate a suicide vest or they didn't do it very well. But the point is, they were involved in such operations and a lot of people have been killed. And by the way, many of them have probably been Muslims, right? Because the only people they hate more than Christians and Jews are Muslims that don't support their view. Those are apostates, and they're actually worse than Christians and Jews. They get to burn in hell for all time, as far as they're concerned. I have encountered Al-Qaeda guys, as an example, who at a certain point in this process of years of jihad, if you will, begin to awaken to the fact that I don't really think this is what the Quran is supposed to be all about. Like, God's not really telling us to blow up a Muslim wedding and kill men, women, and children. And they essentially begin to question the morality of what they were convinced initially that this was all in furtherance of a higher cause, which I know is hard to grasp given the brutality. And then they may eventually get to the point where it's like, I'm not buying, I'm having questions about that. I'm not buying that anymore. I'm not seeing that. I think this is just mass murder. And I'm right. And if you can get the guy in a position where you can have that conversation with him and sort of essentially a conversation that says, look, man, I'm not here to tell you how to live. I'm not here to convert you to Christianity. I'm not here to tell you, you don't want pornography. You think this is all of this other stuff. Basically, you live your life however you want to live your life. What I'm here to do is stop people who they say they're listening to God, but they've made themselves into God. They think they're God. They get to decide who lives and dies. And that's a perversion. So you be as devout as you want in a peaceful way. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to ask for your help to stop mass murder. We should be able to agree that killing people, blowing people up is wrong. And if you can get to that point, yeah, you can successfully recruit. Not all of them, but some of them. Now, there's another trick. I mean, first of all, you have to be able to do that and have him believe you. Like, at the end, he's still got to trust you, and he's still got to think you're not going to get me killed. Because if they even suspect me, they're not going to start an investigation. They're just going to start cutting me up into small pieces. That's the way AQ works. They don't assign an investigator to find out if you're guilty or not. They just figure, we'll find out the old-fashioned way by killing you or cutting your wife and kids up in front of you, usually starting with your firstborn male child. So if he doesn't trust you, it doesn't really make any difference what you just said to him, because, like, I don't think you can keep me alive, so forget about it. But that's another big piece is obviously, I just described this conversation, which in some cases is a conversation that takes place over weeks. Well, I got to figure out how the hell I can have that conversation with a guy who's a member of an active Al-Qaeda cell, right? He's not usually palling around with a bunch of white boys on the sidewalk. So I got to figure out how to find him and engineer that and even create a situation in which we can have that conversation. Anyway, this is, I don't want to get lost in teaching a class on recruiting people, but the point is it possible? Yeah, it is. Yeah. It is possible. Is it easy? It is not easy. And a lot of variables that go into it. And then after you've made all those commitments and the guy actually agreed to this, you have to come through and you have to keep him alive.
Yeah.
You have to actually be competent enough. And this is, he's not, he may be very well intentioned, but if he doesn't think you actually have you don't have what it takes to keep him alive. Let's leave it at that. Then he's not betting on you.
Wow. Well, what's coming to my mind is I worked in higher education for 20 years. And 15 years I was in university housing administration. And what I saw was a lot of Middle Eastern men would come and live in university housing. There were times that we had apartments that were wallpapered in pornography.
Yes.
They partied and drank like
yes.
the extreme college student and yes. would then go back and tell their cohorts at home how immoral Americans are, and they would use that yes. experience to validate why it should be eliminated from the planet yes. without the cultural understanding that U.S. citizens live with the benefit of choice, of moral yes. choice, of of values and virtue and our God-given right of free will. And so not all students live that way. And they choose to not represent that piece of it, but this extreme piece. And so from my perspective, that's what you were talking about. Just brought to mind was these students going back and then saying, yeah, I lived there and they're horrible.
Yes.
Well, you were making the choice to engage in that behavior.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, let me throw out this caveat. First of all, there's a whole lot of Muslims in the world, and nothing I'm saying is intended and should be taken by anybody to say that this is somehow we can now characterize every Muslim on the planet as being precisely the same.
I agree.
That's not what I'm saying.
Yes.
If we're talking about, well, let me come at it from this direction. We're talking about either Shia or Sunni extremists. In the case of Sunnis, folks, very broadly speaking, Salafis. Anyway, many of them are also peaceful. But if we're talking about jihadist extremists, let's say I take down a safe house in the Middle East, which is in use by a terrorist group, a group associated with Al Qaeda or somebody of that ilk. What am I going to find? Well, maybe weapons and explosives, depending on where they are. And so I'm going to find all sorts of hard drives and computer systems. And on that, I'm going to find designs for chemical weapons and yada, yada. You know what else I'm going to find? I'm going to find gigs and gigs of porn. And not just pornography, and I don't want to get lost in depravity here, but not just pornography, but the most degrading, ugly, nasty, humiliating pornography. In other words, all of that pornography involves the abuse and degradation of women. And in most cases, what we're talking about is Western women. And it is exactly this dynamic that I as the jihadist, obviously I'm enjoying this, but this is how I view the world. Me degrading you and abusing you and using you is okay because you are actually, and this gets so twisted that even though I've been dealing with this for decades, I still boggles my mind that this mental process is possible. But it's okay for me to do that to you, but you're the problem. Like, you deserve it. You brought it on yourself. I somehow emerge from this as still holier than thou and clean and pure in the eyes of God, but you are the filth. And that is 100%. If we're talking about like folks inside Al Qaeda, 100% the view they're going to have. I was going to say revolting, but revolting is not nearly a strong enough word. I mean, it's what you really end up thinking is, man, you're not really human anymore. You know that? Like, this is, this, I don't know what passage you went down, but this is monstrous. You are really a monster now that you think this way. But that's absolutely the case. I mean, literally every safe house you take down. Yeah, here's the design for a cheap chemical weapon that's been passed around, yada, yada. Here are their plans for this. Here are their plans for that. Here are their various proclamations on the Islamic Caliphate of whatever. And then here's just gigs and gigs and gigs of the nastiest pornography, always involving Western women, always really brutal and horrifying. So that's, I mean, I don't know how you get any more sick or twisted than that. It's just...
No. Well, I'm sorry you had to witness that, but thank you on our behalf for your service and the work you did.
Part of the job is ugly images. If I find a system to get them out of my head, I'd probably use that, but that goes with the territory.
You need a hypnotherapist.
That's when you go home from work and have a stiff drink. That's what you do. And hopefully not too many of those, or now you've created another problem.
Right.
That's right.
Yes. Before we close out, you are the author of a book, The CIA War in Kurdistan, The Untold Story of the Northern Front in the Iraq War. Could you just give us a brief overview of the book?
So I got sent into, well, I didn't get sent in. I volunteered for the job. In fact, I demanded the job. So that'll give you an idea how bright I am. So I took the first team into Iraq almost a year in advance of the 2003 invasion. So me and 7 other guys went into Kurdistan, in other words, the northern mountainous region of Iraq, which was and operated with the Kurds and sort of laid the foundation for the entire invasion, gathering intelligence and ultimately carrying out a lot of covert action, blowing things up and all of that. I guess we plussed up to eventually around 50 guys somewhere. That the CIA war in Kurdistan, honestly, I wrote as a tribute to the men and women. There were not many women, but there were several women that were at various points part of the team who were there for a year all by themselves in the mountains with the Kurds. At risk all day, every day, running operations into Iraqi-controlled territory, training sabotage teams, blowing up targets, and ultimately leading the way into both Mosul and Kirkuk in the north, because with the bulk of the American army never actually came into northern Iraq. The invasion came from the south. So in the north, the invasion, even when it happened, ultimately was us and the Kurds, Army Special Forces. That basically Army 10th Special Forces Group came in, several hundred of them. And very late in the game, the 173rd Airborne jumped in from Italy. But for a very long time, it was, 50 guys in the mountains and the Kurds to carry that. So I felt like, okay, I mean, that's the entire reason I wrote the book, is like, look, these guys, it's not me. It's those people, those men and women did a frigging amazing job. I mean, the other side of this conflict were hundreds of thousands of Iraqi troops, armor, artillery, surface-to-surface missiles. And they did a frigging amazing job. And I would say something of which I'm very proud. We never lost a man throughout that entire operation. So the book is a tribute to them, because they deserve it.
That's amazing. Amazing.
That's available on Amazon. Y'all should go and get that. You also had mentioned Hillsdale College, the book. So if everybody, we'll make sure that all these links are, when we put it on YouTube and Rumble, we'll put all those links in there for the podcasts and your Mary Grace by talk on Rumble. So everybody can go in and check that out. But go get that book too.
So the last plug, I know we're running out of time. The last plug I'm going to make has absolutely nothing to do with me, because we spent all this time talking about me, and I'm fine with that. Let's keep in mind that Mrs. Faddis is also a retired CIA case officer and ops officer, which means that she did all the same stuff that I did, probably better, and she definitely looked better doing it for the entire time. So pretty serious lady as well. Oh, and along the way, she raised 4 kids. So,
wow,
yes, absolutely amazing.
I'm sure that's a story to tell too. Holy cow!
Oh yeah,
that's great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. This has been just fabulous information. Going back to our domestic situation, what are your last words of, advice or guidance for our voters between now and November 7th?
Well, look, transparently, I'm an America First guy, right? I am a Trump supporter. What I tell everybody at this point is, look, you got to laser focus on 2 things, because we're down to tactics and we're way under 90 days. First, everybody who already supports Donald Trump needs to register and vote. Okay? I know that sounds like, well, thanks, Sam. That was a frigging piece of genius advice, obviously. But the point is, a lot of them aren't even registered. In Pennsylvania alone, over 500,000 gun owners aren't even registered to vote. Now, overwhelmingly, you figure that demographic is pro-Trump. And they're all fired up about how Joe and Kamala are going to take their guns, which is, they should be fired up. But you can't bother to register or vote. Like, we got to change that. And we could go issue by issue, Christians, evangelicals in particular, complain all day long about the cultural assault on America. I'm with you. Well, then you need to get in the game, guys. So that's a biggie. Turnout. And the second is this: you got to talk to undecided people. And I'm just going to say this. I chant all day, every day about the ideological components of what's going on in America. But you're not going to convert your undecided neighbor. You're not going to get that person to vote for Trump by talking about how Marxists are taking over the country. I'm not saying I disagree with you. You got to talk to them about the price of gas, the price of food, crime in the streets, right? What we used to call in politics kitchen table issues. The kids are in bed, mom and dad are trying to balance the checkbook, and the math doesn't work. What are they talking about at the table? These are people who hate Republicans, hate Democrats, hate politics. Ronald Reagan summed it up this way: are you better off than you were 4 years ago? No honest American can answer that question in the affirmative. Now, some of them won't listen to you. I get it, ideologically. But that few percentage in the middle that will decide this, they remember that I couldn't finish filling the truck today because I didn't have enough cash in my wallet. And and my wife told me to pick up milk on the way home, to be all stereotypical. And I don't know if I got $5 in my wallet to pick up milk for the kids on the way home. Right. Because that's where Americans really are. They're buying groceries on credit cards. And then paying the minimum balance every month. That's where we are as a country. So just, hammer those concrete real world issues when you're talking to your undecided friends. And for the love of God, talk to people. Get off the internet and actually go out and speak to people.
And I'm living proof of that, what you just said too, because the first time I ever voted in my life was 2020, because I didn't want to vote how my family told me to vote. I wanted to vote for the person that I wanted, not the party that they told me to do. So when I had 4 years of Trump and I saw how better off my family was, as soon as that, I think it was April I signed up, or right before the deadline, I'm like, I'm going to register to vote, and I'm going to vote for Trump in 2020 because I see how much better we are now and how much better we could be in 4 years with him there. And that was, exactly what you're saying now. Like, I know people who are affected by everything, not just me, that don't vote. And you just have to keep civil conversation going. But that eventually they're going to say, you know what? They're right. It is affecting me. I can't do this for another 4 years. I'm not going to lose my house. I'm going to lose my car. So I agree 100%. Civil conversation needs to come back to our country, and it needs to happen now.
Yes, ma'am. 100%.
Great. Sam, it's just been a pleasure. I'm going to be mulling this over for days. This has been the greatest conversation, and I know that our listeners are really going to appreciate it too. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much.